Hello, everyone. I am so excited today to be speaking with Serena Low, the Quiet Warrior Coach. Welcome, Serena. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for having me here.
Oh, it's just fantastic. And everyone who's on today, it'll be wonderful if you could put your questions or comments for Serena to talk about later on in the session, and we'll have a Q&A towards the end. Now, today, Serena is going to be talking about a topic that's very near and dear to her, and that is for how introverts can manage their energy in social situations such as going to parties, networking, at conferences, and also in their careers, whether they're chairing a meeting, speaking up in a meeting, being on an interview with someone, or even public speaking, which is a topic that's near and dear to me. So without further ado, I would like to ask you, Serena, to tell us about you and your background, which is quite interesting, and how you became a coach. But just maybe go back and talk about your initial career let's start there.
Okay, so my initial career was as a lawyer. I was a government lawyer for 11 years back in Singapore, which is where I come from. And I would say that right up till the age of 35, I was very much doing what I felt I had to do because that was the right way to be, as in doing things that were based more on external validation, on approval, on what society felt was the right thing to do, doing my parents proud, upholding the family name, if you will, making all the choices that on reflecting, I realized that were not really consciously my choices, but more like subconsciously trying to please and to gain approval. And it's really interesting that, when you come to that point and you realize, you observe yourself doing those things and making those decisions, and you realize, wait a minute, what if there is something else out there for me? Have I explored other possibilities? What if I were to venture onto a different path? And that only happened when I was 35, and I was in my 11th year of practice, as it were, sitting in this meeting. And I still remember that day, sitting in this meeting with a colleague and another senior. And this senior, in the middle of us talking about, punctuation and how to reorganize sentences and amend legislation, all very exciting stuff. Suddenly he asks us, have you thought about what's ahead of you? What's down the track for you in terms of your career in public service? And until then, I remember I had been very, very contented to just follow instructions, to do what was needed to be done, do my work every day, go back at 5 or 6 or whatever, fulfill my responsibilities. But I never thought beyond as to what would I be doing in 10 or 20 years or 30 years time? And what happens when you reach, let's say, the peak of your career and look back? And then suddenly I had this vision as he was talking about, all the progression through the stages, and then you reach super scale at some point and you've arrived, apparently. And I've pictured myself 30 years into the future at retirement age, looking back, and I was struck with horror. I suddenly realized that I felt really, really trapped. And it's like, you are teetering at that very point because you feel that if you take another step forward and you take the wrong step, you're going to be stuck forever, spinning literally, on this treadmill, and you can't get off. That was the thing
And,
that frightened me the most.
and you hadn't really thought about it so deeply up until that point. Is that right?
That's right. I hadn't really thought about it. I just taken it for granted that, year on year, yes, this is what we all do. We get rotated to different departments and agencies. We explore different aspects of the law and we just keep progressing. But I hadn't thought beyond that, like in the larger scheme of things,
Yeah.
what was life meant to be about? And was this what I really wanted?
Wow, that's a real revelation. It's like they say people should write their eulogy while they're alive and how they're going to be remembered. It's like starting from the end and working backwards. And in a way, you did that with your career. You thought, what's going to be happening decades from now? Is this really what I want? And it was like a miracle that that person asked you to think about it.
I think so. I think very much it was divine timing.
Yeah. Wow. So continue. So how you got onto your path that you're on now. So you went from the law, which is a very left-brained profession, and what were the steps that took you on your path, on your journey?
I wish I could tell you that it was a series of logical steps, Susan, and I went from plan A to plan B very gracefully and very elegantly.
Elegantly, yeah. We're thinking the same word. Yes.
But the truth is that it was actually more of a meander. It was nicely put. I would say it was like a scenic detour
Yes.
through the wilderness, because I didn't have a plan B at that point. Some people have a very exciting plan B, as in, for instance, if you get headhunted away to something much more lucrative or much more, glamorous, that's something to shout about perhaps. But in my case, it was more a case of going from somewhere to then going nowhere, in the sense that I didn't know who I was at that point, stripped of my job title and my profession and my social status, such as it was at that point, because I hadn't really taken the time to ask myself those deep questions, like, who am I? What do I care about? What frustrates me? What excites me? What makes me come alive? What do I love? What's my passion? And all those things, which only came, with the benefit of hindsight and life experience.
That's so interesting. That's something that we should all be thinking about before we launch into a career. And often we find ourselves in a career that's unfulfilling because we haven't gone through those initial steps of understanding ourselves, being a bit introspective and looking at the things that light us up and looking at our values and our interests and our passions, like being in that flow state. When we're in that flow state, that we don't notice time going by. That's a clue that we're what we should be doing with our life.
That's so true. And everything you said there, that wasn't even in my vocabulary at that point, values and passions. I just had some inkling that there was something more out there, but I hadn't dared to explore it yet. And I was really afraid to explore it because it meant leaving everything familiar and comfortable and safe behind. And then going out into the wilderness with no support, no path ahead of you.
Nothing to hold on to, no. Because it's
right.
I think a lot of us stay in professions because they feel safe and secure, and you're getting a steady paycheck, and I don't know, you can just see, you feel, you just, when you get up in the morning, you know where you're going, you know what you have to do, and everything's easy. I know the word I'm thinking of. You're playing it safe. That's the expression I was looking for. And it takes courage, and you should commend yourself for looking beyond the safe path.
I suppose I can do that now with a little bit of hindsight, further down the path. But at that time, it felt like a very reckless thing to do and totally irresponsible.
Yes.
Based on, especially feedback from people around. You're like, now what are you doing?
You're throwing it away. You're throwing it away. All that training. You're in this prestigious law job. Oh, you'd have to stick with that till the end. So, okay, Serena, now tell me, how did you get into coaching? How did you take that scenic path and go through all the difficult, meandering? How did you find coaching?
I would say coaching found me. I was not looking for coaching as such. I was looking for answers. I was looking for help for my own life. And so I took to browsing the self-help, aisle in bookstores, because I love bookstores and I'm always going in there to look for wisdom. And I was just drawn to those shelves where they tell you, anything is possible, you've got limitless potential. And I was reading all these things, all these books. And I suppose subconsciously, some of that wisdom must have, really made an impression and set me off on this path. And I just wanted to know if if there was a better way to live, something that was not just based on what I had been taught or what the authorities say, or that is the right thing to do and you should be doing this at this age and so on, but something larger, something more inspiring, something, and I didn't even know what I was looking for.
Something that lights you up. But
That's it.
And once you get on that path of self-help and continuous improvement and learning and gaining wisdom, you can't get off it. It just hooks you in.
It just does, because it changes everything. The way you look at life, the way you look at yourself, the way you look at other people, your relationships,
Yes.
and you can't unknow all that you've just started to know.
That's right. You can't.
And so
You're
it
right.
shifts you. Yes, it does transform you from the inside out, as it were.
Yeah, and you just find yourself evolving all the time and growing as a person. So with coaching, when you coach someone, how does it make you feel, and how do you help people? Just tell us a bit more about that.
I think with coaching, the whole idea is that you're giving the person power. You're giving them the power back to take charge of their own lives. I think a lot of us don't realize how much we're a byproduct of what we've been taught, what we've been unconsciously raised to believe is true, and we don't really question those assumptions. And it's so when a person is given the option to take responsibility for themselves, one of two things can happen. One is that they refuse to. There is a lot of resistance, a lot of fear, and that's totally normal and totally understandable. But the other thing is that something wakes up inside them and becomes alive, and they realize for the first time perhaps that there are possibilities in their life. There are things that they have never done, and they can do something new, they can experience something new, they can literally be a new person. And I think when that that moment comes and you see that little gleam in the client's eyes, and you see them realize something for the first time, that's a really exciting thing.
Yeah, it's like what you went through with your revelation, and you can open up someone else's eyes. It must light you up inside when you can help someone that way.
It definitely does. Even if it's just one person, just knowing that, because each of us is interconnected with other people, and
Yes.
we are never really alone in whatever changes we make in our own lives. They affect the people around us. So there is that ripple effect that goes out. So if I can help one person change their life, they can change their own family relationships. They can undo whatever, for instance, past experiences that have been negative. They can look at it in a more positive way. They can change the relationship with their children and therefore affect future generations. They can change the way they relate to others at work and so on. So there is that amazing rippling effect that does go out.
That's powerful, the ripple effect. It's so true. You change yourself and you can potentially change the next person, and they can change people. So it really cascades down the line. And you run some wonderful meetup groups. Can you just talk about them and how they're really designed for the quieter person, the introverts amongst us?
Yes. So Meetup is this platform that I stumbled upon, and it's amazing because it connects people based on common interests. It's like, if you have this particular hobby, you go on Meetup and you're bound to find a group that is doing that. So one thing that struck me when I was attending business networking events was that they are usually run in a certain style that doesn't always suit an introverted person. And sometimes, some introverts also have other challenges they're working through. They may be socially anxious and so on. And the kind of atmosphere of a typical business networking event tends to be a very loud, very stimulating, lots of people, sometimes music as well. There's a lot to deal with. So when an introvert walks into a room like that, and maybe there's 60, 80 people, and then they are expected to circle the room and get to know people and initiate conversations, give out their business card, be prepared for a 30-second elevator pitch. That's the way it's run. And say something about themselves and answer the question, so what do you do? It may seem like a very innocent question, so what do you do? But it brings up all kinds of fears, in someone who is not prepared. And because the introvert needs time to think and to prepare and to warm up with plenty of advance notice. So if they walk in unprepared, they feel overwhelmed very easily. and they get anxious and they think to themselves, what am I doing here? I should just go home. I should never have come, and so on. So I was wondering if there was a better, an alternative way for introverts to network in a way that was more suitable, more low key, not so much stimulation, a quieter way, a more comfortable way for them. And so I found Meetup, and I thought, maybe we could start something here. And so I did. And so the first group for business people started back in 2017, and that went quite well for a while. And then, the pandemic hit and everything went into lockdown here in Melbourne. And so I thought, I wonder if there's something we can do online, through because of the numerous lockdowns. I wonder if we could stay socially connected. So I started another 2 meetups just for the introverts to connect socially. And out of that has grown all these in-person meetings, in Melbourne. And sometimes we have people join us online, interstate and overseas as well. So it's growing. It's a thriving community. And I'm really glad, really grateful that now we've got this safe space where introverts can feel that they can talk to other people who get them, who don't ask them, why are you so quiet? Or why you're not saying anything.
And introverts, sometimes they start talking, they don't stop. People think they don't say much, but you get them going and they go.
That is so true. I've seen it myself at many of our meetups, just watching them from a distance, and if you just
like a mother hen
casually, and you don't think they are introverts at all, because they're also alive and animated and chatty because they found their own people that understand them and get their vibe.
They get them. They get each other, and they're with their tribe, and they're comfortable. I think that's, and they're in that quieter space, like you were saying. Those a lot of parties and networking events, they're loud, they're noisy. People have to be someone they're not. They can just be themselves and relax into it.
Yes. And so that's really, really it, just creating that kind of an atmosphere where introverts can be themselves and be free of that judgment of, I have to be a certain way in order to fit in.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Kudos to you for creating those groups, and you're doing wonderful work, and you're changing people's lives, which is what it's all about. And that's when you go back to those law days when you're looking for something to light you up. I think you found a lot of things to light you up. So I wanted to ask you, because we talk about introverts, some people think they're quiet people, they're shy people, they're a bit socially awkward. What's the definition of an introvert? Because I was watching that TED talk that you recommended by Susan Cain, which is absolutely brilliant, about quieter people, the introverts amongst us. And I was amazed that 1/3 to 1/2 of the population are introverts. So tell us more about what an introvert is. That'd be terrific if you could do that.
Yeah. So as the best definition I've heard from Susan Cain was that it's to do with the energy level. So some people are energized by being around people and by being around many people. So, if in a party, in a large gathering, they get very animated and alive because they're just taking in all this energy from the people around them. And they love, being the focal point. They love, the conversations. They love the speed that everything is going at. The introvert, on the other hand, is quite the opposite. So the introvert needs a lot of solitude, a lot of, alone time to recharge. And they can show up to a party and they can, be sociable and enjoy the conversation, but then they get drained really quickly. So it's to do with their social battery, right? So the social battery gets drained, and that's when they start getting really tired. They need to get away. They need to be alone. They need to recharge. So it's really about how we charge and, recharge ourselves.
Yeah, so it's just getting drained with too much social interaction. That's really the nub of it. It's like a mobile phone that the battery goes down with too much use. When you've got your Bluetooth on and your mobile data going, and it just drains so quickly. So I think they need alone time to bring the power back up. Is that really a way of looking at it as well?
That's a really good analogy, Susan. Yes, the idea of the battery draining and, just keeping an eye on that battery.
Yes, because I can relate to that, because sometimes I get drained, and I know that when I take a good book and I read, and I just feel like my energy comes back, and it's interesting. But having said that, a lot of us aren't purely introvert or purely extrovert. There's a spectrum. So can you explain about that spectrum, how you can't classify us as one or the other, or we may change based on the context that we're in?
Yes. So one of the things I've learned is that we actually have a lot of behavioral flexibility. sometimes we're not aware of it, where we feel, oh, I'm an introvert, so I can't do certain things. I can't public speak, for instance, or I can't chair meetings, or I can't, be a facilitator. But the truth is that we are actually quite flexible. It's more like I suppose the idea is like if you play the piano, for instance, or any kind of musical instrument, you might say I can only play classical music. But then if you had the behavioral flexibility, you could also enjoy class pop and jazz and all the other genres. And so it just gives you more room for enjoyment when you can go up and down the spectrum, as it were. So we're not locked into like one corner and just say, I'm an introvert, so I can't move the other way. I can't talk to people. But it's more like, okay, so what does this situation demand of me? In this case, I may have to flex a little bit more, project a little bit more because I'm in front of a group of people. I'm the speaker, or I'm the facilitator, and people, there's a certain expectation that I would show up and lead and, make the conversation happen in the group. And so therefore you would have to project yourself accordingly. That means a greater output of energy during that time, but then also knowing that you have plenty of time afterwards to catch up and to recharge. It's not like you're functioning at one energy level all the time. The energy level goes up and down, but then we need to take responsibility for how we manage that energy.
And which is the whole theme of today's conversation. And you've preempted what we're going to be talking about in a few seconds. Let me just ask you, introverts, they've got strengths and they've got challenges. What are some of their strengths?
I would say one of the introvert strengths is the ability to listen very deeply. When you're with an introvert who is, practicing that listening skill, actively, you feel really heard and validated. You feel like you're the most important person in the world, that nothing else matters to that person right now except your interests. And, to be able to give someone that kind of an experience is like giving them a gift, because most of us are quite distracted a lot of the time, myself included, right?
We are. We've got technology pulling us. Yes.
That's right.
You're right. The attention, the gift of attention, it's huge. You don't get enough people who listen with their heart and soul, do you, these days?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's one of their core strengths. Now, just briefly, touch on some of the challenges, because there's what do you call them? The terrific three or the terrible three? Or you have some name you like to give those challenges. Yes.
Yeah, I suppose you could call them the terrific trio or the terrible trio. So let's say POP, yeah? So P for perfectionism, O for overthinking, and P for procrastinating. So they're all interrelated. So that's why I like to put them together as a trio. So the idea being that, we have standards and therefore we are perfectionists. We want to do things well. We don't want to put something out into the world that we can't put our signature to, because it's a reflection of who we are, our identity, right? But then the other side of it is that it can be too much, when you let perfectionism get in the way, and then you can't get started on something because if it's not perfect, I won't do it. As long as I don't do it, nobody can say it's not, it's imperfect or there's some flaw and so on. But as soon as I start drafting it, putting it out there, letting people know about it, I'm exposed, right? I become vulnerable. And it's that fear of judgment that makes us hold on to the myth of perfectionism rather than the opposite of actually taking action and doing something. So same goes with overthinking. Like, you could be in a meeting, you could have this great idea that just comes to you. But, because we're overthinking it and we're trying to make sure it's packaged properly and we've filtered everything correctly, we're not offending anybody, we're not saying something we shouldn't say, and so on. By the time we finish that process, the moment has gone, the opportunity has moved on, and or worse still, somebody with a lot more confidence just says it out. And probably is like almost exactly the thing we wanted to say, but we were just holding back because, again, fear of judgment.
So you self-sabotage by you overanalyze and think of what about this and what about that, rather than just saying, I'm going to go with it. And that's where the extroverts often just blurt things out without really doing all that underlying thinking and critiquing. Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one that you've just mentioned there, Susan. And that's another difference, because extroverts think out loud, whereas introverts like to think privately and then produce the filtered result, curated, and then offer
Yes.
up something that's as flawless as possible.
Yes, and make sure it's all internally correct before they share it with the world and face their judgment. And it's a very interesting thing that it's just that awareness of understanding yourself and then knowing to pull back and say, "Hey, I'll just give my idea and not fear
Yes.
that judgment." But
Yes.
it takes the awareness too, because it doesn't always come naturally.
No, it doesn't. Yes. Awareness is, I've heard someone say it's like 95% of the journey.
Yes, I think with anything in life, awareness is key to breaking any habit that you want to clear from your behavior.
Mm.
So, Serena, we touched on this before about introverts managing their energy and because we can deplete our energy battery quickly. What tips have you got? General ones, and then maybe we'll go into some specific situations. But what are the general tips you have for introverts to keep their energy as high as they can when they're mingling with people, networking, just having to be with people in it, maybe in an atmosphere that they're not that comfortable in and that they need to be in for their career or their personal life?
Mm. I think one of them is just being very mindful that there is a time frame, like let's say you're there for 2 hours. It's really just 2 hours out of your day. But to the introvert going into that kind of a situation, 2 hours can feel like a very long time. Like, how quickly can I get away and make my escape? But the idea also is you can go into there with a very different kind of mindset, which actually changes the way you show up. And I like to do that by thinking of myself as showing up in service. So what am I there to contribute? Not just having to suffer, by being present and having to endure all the small talk and so on. The language that we use to ourselves in describing where we are, what we do, and who we're doing it with is very, very important. So if I language it to myself as I'm there to be of service, I'm there to contribute, I'm there to make some interesting new connections, I'm there to learn something new, that's a very different vibe from being I'm there because I don't have a choice. I'm forced to. I have to do this for my career. The feeling is very different. And you carry that feeling into the room with you. As I always say to our meetup attendees, we are responsible for the energy we bring to the room. So we might say, oh, I'm introvert, so I'm passive by nature. I'll let other people dominate or direct the conversation or make me feel comfortable. But actually, we have a lot of choice in that, in how we project ourselves and who we choose to speak with and for how long and so on. And we can do all kinds of things like planning how we enter a conversation, how we exit a conversation gracefully, in a way that preserves our energy, but also makes the most of the time that we have there. So that when we leave, we don't feel, oh, thank goodness I'm out of there, but more like, oh, that was a really great conversation. I actually had a good time today. And we can come away feeling, like we've gone up a little, another level in our self-development and self-growth.
That's beautiful. I love the way you speak about we're responsible for the energy we bring into the room, and and when we change our language, rather than saying I must do this, I have to do this, I'm obliged to do this, and think I choose to do this, and I can help someone, I can be of service. We're doing that beautiful thing called reframing that we know is so valuable, and changing our language, because the words we tell ourselves affect how we feel. So we're taking control rather than being a passive bystander and letting our energy just evaporate. We're actually being empowered, and you get a better result. I think you get
You
a much
do.
better result.
You
And
do.
what about now? When with public speaking, can you talk about there's performance anxiety versus performance edge? And I think it's similar to what you've been saying, but can you maybe explain how, if we're asked to give a talk, chair a meeting, anything where we're in the spotlight, in the limelight, how can we give ourselves that burst of energy from, how can you tell us how we can give ourselves some more energy rather than feeling flat?
Yes. So it again depends on how we approach that opportunity. And I use the word opportunity quite deliberately. We can think of it as, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in the limelight. All these people are going to stare at me. I'm going to mess up, and they're going to laugh privately, or, and then you say, what am I doing here? I'm not worthy to be here. That, someone, they made a mistake, they're going to find me out. All these kinds of things. And these are very common, very normal thoughts that people have. And that's to do with, again, the fear of judgment, the fear of exposure, fear of public scrutiny. And we think that because we have put ourselves up there, people expect us to be some kind of, expert and to know a lot about a lot of things. And as soon as we make one mistake, they're going to jump on us. But what I've discovered is that people are generally very kind. We all know that public speaking is like, the number one fear of people, most people. So to us, anybody who is brave enough to put themselves up there on the stage for a couple of minutes and talk about something, we want them to do well. It's like we go to a concert and we don't hope that the performer will perform badly. We are actually cheering them on. We want them to do really well so that we can all have a good time. And same goes when we are public speaking, right? We want the speaker to do well, to engage us, to talk about something memorable or wise or insightful that we can take with us and use, and we come away feeling elevated. So think of it, remind yourself, when you're up there, that people are cheering for you, even if you don't know it. They're actually sending you a lot of good vibes, a lot of energy. They want you to do well. And the other thing that helps me also is realizing that this is like a divine opportunity. You have just received this gift of being given this, let's say 20 minutes or whatever, to go in front of people and talk about something that you care very much about and you know something about, and in the hope that it will help them in some way. And if you can help one person, just set the bar really low, because we know we are perfectionists. If you can help one person come away feeling better about themselves or regain some hope or get some encouragement, then you've done a really good job. And so
yes.
when you look at it that way, as again, being in service, it takes away the anxiety. The anxiety comes from feeling that I have to perform and people have to applaud me for a perfect performance. But what gives the edge, for an introvert who is performing, is more coming from the other angle. What can I do to make this presentation memorable? What can I do to help my audience engage and really come alive and make the best use of their time here, so that they don't feel like, oh, I just wasted my time, my 2 hours or my day or whatever, but I actually learned something. I can take that, I can go home, I can talk to my family differently, I can, show up differently at work and so on. So it's the minute you employ all your energy to thinking about what can I do for someone else, it takes away the fear and the anxiety of how do I look, which is very much ego driven and fear driven. And it becomes more service oriented and more about the other person. So when you put the other person's interests as your focal point, it just transforms everything.
And so it deflects it from you and onto them.
Yes,
And yes.
yes.
That's the power. Yes.
That's right. And suddenly you become aligned with where your audience is heading as well.
And it's about
you're championing
helping
them now.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's that. And we were talking the other day, there's like an energy flow between the audience and you. It opens up those channels. Can you talk a bit about that?
Because we're all interconnected, energetically as well. So everybody's putting out some amount of energy and a certain quality of energy. And when you're there and you're plugged into that energy and you recognize that, that you and you're all on the same side, you are helping them and they're also helping you because they are cheering for you. And so there is this beautiful, collective energy, a very positive kind of energy. And everybody, when you tap into that, because your mind is focused on the same thing, to improve yourself, to gain some wisdom, to do better in some aspect of life, to solve some problem. It's like there's a united kind of a collective kind of wisdom, and everybody is headed in the same direction. So there's no conflict or tension, and there's no room for you to worry about yourself when you're taking part in that kind of, uplifting kind of a mood.
Oh, it's like poetry the way you speak, Serena. You always speak like the most beautiful, fluent. I don't know. I could listen to you speak all day. But you're tapping into some energy field that you can't see, but it's there, and it's almost like metaphysics the way it works, and it's hard for the mind to sort of work around, understand it, but it really is there. And I think another thing that I find useful is trying to look at friendly faces if I'm talking live, if you talk to friendly faces in the crowd, it does something too to elevate your energy. Rather than, sometimes people they're frowning and they're thinking and they're concentrating, and you can focus on them and think, oh, am I not getting through to them? Sometimes they're just thinking and they're not smiling. But I find that when you lock eyes with a friendly person, it also does something to boost your energy. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right, Susan. I think we all look for that friendly face, that ally, that person that gets, and is actually interacting with the content. And when you see that friendly face, it just affirms to you that you feel safer somehow,
Yes.
that it's okay, you're on the right path, and so on. And so it's also what you notice and what you focus on. So if you're focusing on friendly faces, you'll get more and
You'll
more of them.
find,
You'll
yes.
notice more and more of them as well.
Yes, and one other thing. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sharing my tip here. But another thing, if you're speaking live, we know what I found's really useful. You meet people at the door and you strike up a conversation with them. So that initially they might have been a stranger, and you talk to them. You find out their name and a little bit about them, and then when it comes to actually giving your presentation, you know them, so they're no longer strangers. So you're talking to friends. So it's these little tweaks that can make things just feel a bit more friendly, I think. What
That's
do
a
you?
very, yes, that's a very, very smart thing to do, Susan. And yeah, definitely showing up early, mingling, getting to know
Yes,
people, especially if they didn't know that you were the guest speaker. And then they suddenly see you come up on being introduced and all that. It just gives that extra, like
yeah,
a sense of delight, a sense of recognition, and you
yeah.
feel more connected to that person somehow.
Yes, I think both parties feel more relaxed because the barriers are broken down, that you're all together in this, you're all one and the same. Like that thing you were talking about with the energy. It's like you're
That's
all
right.
you're all connected. Now, Serena, do you have any other juicy tips on energy, or do you think we've covered most of them? Any others that we've haven't spoken about?
I'm sure if we carried on talking for another 30 minutes, there'll be other tips that come up.
But yes, and I think you touched on this. Don't wait if you're feeling like your energy is depleting. Don't wait till it's down to you've got 5% left in you. Sometimes it's better to leave a bit early if you feel like you've
Yes.
run out of steam.
Yes, definitely. It affects your demeanor so much, your body language. I know that there have been a couple of occasions when I thought I'll just hang in there a little bit more, 5 minutes more, 10 minutes more, and then before you know it, you're like completely, like you're practically at 0%, and then you have to stand up and you have to excuse yourself and go. And
Yes,
this
and
happens
it's
even when I'm facilitating the meetup myself. So, like after 2 hours or 2.5 hours, I realize, oh my goodness, I probably left it a little bit late. And so I've had
yes,
occasions where I've had to stand up and, say, sorry guys, my battery's running low. And they get it because we're all
they get it.
introverts, right?
They do.
Yeah.
They
And
do. They
they,
do get
people
it.
are perfectly accepting and they'll just carry on with their lives and their conversations.
That's
Sometimes we
right.
think it's like we're going to disrupt, the flow of things. It's very rude or something. And again, that's us overthinking and worrying too much about what people think. Most people are
Yes,
people of goodwill and they
yes.
understand these things because these are just very normal emotions.
And I think that's a big one too, not worrying what people think, doing your own thing, being your own person. And I think that drains your battery too when we over worry and just we have to suit ourselves in this world. As long as you're not hurting anyone, you've got to make yourself happy. And I think it's part of being just an assertive person.
Definitely. And that's a very good topic for your next session, I'm sure. This
Yeah,
whole
well,
idea of
setting
assertiveness.
boundaries and being assertive, and yeah, because
Yes,
you only disappoint. You don't want to be a people pleaser because that's not healthy. Then you don't please yourself. So,
true.
but that's yes. So that's wonderful. Let me ask you. I'd like to ask you a question. If you could
Mhm.
go back in time to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you have for that young woman?
I would share with her this quote from Howard Schultz. Now, Howard Schultz used to be the CEO of Starbucks, and he wrote a book which I read and was very, very impressed by. And in it, he says, it's one thing to dream, but when the moment is right, you've got to be willing to go out and find your own sound. And to me, at that time, reading that meant getting to know myself, standing up for myself, being my own champion, my own advocate, not waiting for someone to come and rescue me or offer me a different pathway, but actually doing the hard work of getting to know myself so that I could make certain choices very deliberately and consciously and take responsibility for the consequences. And I think at 18, of course, we are still young and optimistic and a bit uncertain, very uncertain, in fact, about what's ahead of us in life. Is it university? Is it work? Is it something else? And even with the choices that we make, we are constantly questioning ourselves and doubting ourselves. And so it's back to learning to trust that you live in a friendly universe, you're more resourceful than you think, you're more capable than you think. Things will happen, setbacks will happen, mistakes will happen, failures will happen, but that's not the end of the story. It's just the end of this particular chapter, and you always have the freedom to write a new chapter and keep the story going. Just that it's a plot twist. That's all it is. It doesn't mean it's over. It's just taken a different direction. And so realizing that things are not quite so life and death at 18, but actually you have a lot more time than you think to figure things out, to make those mistakes along the way, to find out what you love, what you don't love, what makes you come alive, and what infuriates you or makes you mad about the world. All these things, there's actually more time than we think to find out all these things and then to make the adjustments.
Yes, that's huge, because we think at 18 that we have to have all the answers, and we go into a field of study that's going to be for our life, and so many things. And I like what you said about the plot twists, and it's just being gentle on ourselves and trying things. And if they don't work, you just take another direction. These are the life lessons. I wish all parents could teach their kids these things. It's so important. That's why people like you and I have gone on journeys, looking for wisdom, which I think gives us these ideas of we can do things differently.
That's right.
So, yeah, it's a very, very interesting topic. I think we could talk for hours on all this. It's just been fascinating. Serena, I want to thank you so much for today. Do you have any final comments you'd like to add, or questions that people, we didn't really cover questions too much, but are there any questions that people have asked you on this topic?
Well, I'm just looking at the comments, and I see Sarah has said something about taking responsibility for your own energy levels is something she's had to learn. And Sky is saying that she's loving the conversation, which is awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, that's a huge one, taking responsibility for our energy levels. And thank you, Sky, for your positive remarks. That's been wonderful. It's been a terrific session today, Serena, and I want to thank you again for sharing your wisdom, your great advice, and being part of today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Susan, for having me and for this opportunity to share with your audience.
We'll see everyone soon, and thank you again, Serena. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.